right, good morning. Welcome to the 2021 Head and Neck Cancer Patient and Caregiver Education Symposium. My name is Heather Starmer, and I am the Director of Head and Neck Speech and Swallowing Rehabilitation at the Stanford Cancer Center. And it is my pleasure to welcome all of you, and thank you for joining us today. I hope this turns out to be a great day for all of us. We had all hoped that we would be in person this year after having to cancel last year. But unfortunately, circumstances being what they are, we had to go into a virtual environment. So bear with us today as we try to navigate the intricacies of Zoom and trying to make this as an interactive experience for everyone as we can. If you didn't have a chance to meet with our vendors this morning, they will be available again over the lunch hour. So please feel free to join them then. And also our breakout rooms later this morning will give you guys an opportunity to interact with one another. So our goals today are the same as every year we do this. We want to provide high quality educational material for all of you. We want to facilitate connections with other patients and caregivers and professionals. And we want to highlight the services available through the Stanford Cancer Center that you may or may not be aware of. We have a pretty packed day today. I think we have a lot of interesting presentations as well as some really fantastic panels. So please feel free to join us for any or all of the day today. As I said, we do have vendors today. So these are representatives of different services through the Stanford Cancer Center. If you didn't join them earlier, please join them over the lunch hour. We have representatives from Cancer Rehabilitation, our Supportive Cancer Care Services Program, our Tobacco Cessation Program, our Palliative Medicine Team, Dental Health, as well as our Cancer Center Health Library. We'll also have breakout rooms from 10:55 to 11:30, and then again over the lunch hour. These are the rooms that we created in order to allow you to interact with one another as well as with members of our team. So we'll have breakout rooms specified for caregivers, individuals who are long-term survivors greater than 3 years, those with recurrent or metastatic disease, people who've had surgical treatment or radiation treatment, those who've been newly diagnosed or currently undergoing their treatment, those with thyroid cancer, and those with swallowing difficulties. So please plan to join and interact with each other during our breakout rooms. We are doing our recipe raffle again this year. We are working on putting together a booklet that we can provide to patients with recommendations from other patients. So if you have a specific recipe or recommendation that helped you get through treatment that you think may be helpful for others, please send that on to Tasha at TAUSHAR1 at stanford.edu by the end of the lunch period, and then we'll select 2 individuals who will get gift cards after the lunch period. I want to thank our planning committee. This is a really fabulous group of individuals who have given of their own time in order to plan this event, particularly in light of the challenges of trying to do this in a virtual environment. I want to thank Beth Beadle, Jesse Cody, Jocelyn Hamilton, Allison Jensen, Jennifer Kisner, Hope Kuo, and Lily Lamb for their help in planning the event. And in addition to those who planned, whose names you'll see here again, we also have some individuals who have volunteered to help out today in our breakout room. So thank you to Brian Lasand as well. And I want to give exceptional thanks first to Tasha Richardson. Tasha is truly my right hand in planning this event. I absolutely could not have done this without her. She's been absolutely fabulous in pulling everything together and making the technology work for us. So special thanks to Tasha. I'd like to also acknowledge and thank all of our speakers and panelists for participating in the event today. Thank you to the Stanford Cancer Center leadership for providing ongoing support for this event, as well as generous donors who have supported this event in the past and into the future. Cliff Harris is our development officer who helps us to provide funding for this event. So I'd like to thank Cliff for his continued support in helping procure funding for this event. And particularly want to thank our patient and caregiver speakers who are on our panels today. We know that your voices and your experiences are particularly meaningful to individuals participating in the event. So thank you so much for being part of our day. So the Zoom environment is tricky, and some of you have already found a few little bumps this morning. This is the main webinar session. So this is going to be the session where the majority of the lectures and panels are taking place. When you're in the webinar session, if you have a question, you can use the Q&A function, and that question will then come to our panelists. If we don't have time to answer all of the questions during that speaker's allotted time slot, I've asked the speakers to stay on and at least type in answers to questions. We'll also be having a question and answer panel at the end of the day. And so some of those questions I will hold to the side for that question and answer panel. In terms of the breakout and vendors, you should have received an email from Tasha Richardson yesterday, and then also another today, that provides you with the links for all of the different breakouts and vendor rooms. So when you're using those rooms, you want to unmute yourself when you want to speak, but stay muted if you're listening. And you can choose whether you want to have your camera on or off, depending on your comfort level. If you have any issues with any of the tech, please email Tasha. Again, the email is taushar1@stanford.edu. All right. And it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today, Mr. Jonathan Kaplan. John is a two-time head and neck cancer survivor and is proof that despite a head and neck cancer diagnosis, it's possible to return to a normal, active, and healthy lifestyle after treatment. Jonathan spends his days working as the general counsel for Headspin Inc. And I think you will agree after you hear him speak that he is a true inspiration to us all. Thank you, John, for being part of our day and for kicking off our symposium.
Thank you, Heather. Um, Before I start, I'd like to thank the Stanford Cancer Center and Heather for giving me this opportunity. It's a big opportunity, and I don't take it lightly. And having the chance to speak in front of all you is something that I really appreciate. I'd also like to thank all of the doctors, nurses, therapists, and caregivers that are out there. In particular, my doctors, Dr. Kaplan, Dr. Kalibis, and Dr. Lee, all of the nurses who helped me, and Heather, who was my physical therapist and got me back to where I am. So, with that, let me give you a little introduction to me. Um, I was, prior to joining Headspin, I was the general counsel at ChargePoint. Many of you may have heard of ChargePoint. For those of you who haven't, it's one of the proudest moments of my life and proudest jobs. Uh, we built the electric vehicle charging infrastructure in the US. I started before there was a car on the road, and today ChargePoint has over 1 million users and hundreds of thousands of charging stations throughout the US and the world. And it was a heck of a journey. And now I'm at Headspin and hoping to do great things there. What am I going to speak about? Well, when Heather first invited me to speak today, I said, that would be great. What would you like me to talk about? And she said, John, you talk about whatever you want. And that's a little difficult for me because I like to talk and I like to talk about a lot of things. And the first thing I thought about talking about was, wow, I want to tell everybody about all the things I learned through my cancer journeys. And then I thought about a visit to the psychiatrist with my son, Max, a few years ago. And our children often tell us things about ourselves in ways we may not want to hear, but in ways that are instructive if we do. And what he told the psychiatrist, he goes, my dad's a smart guy. He's a really smart guy, but every moment is a teaching moment. It's like he's a farmer with a bag of seeds and he's walking around the field, throwing around, going, wisdom, wisdom, wisdom. So think about that and think about that conversation with my son. I decided I'm not here today to bestow any wisdom on anybody. Instead, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go through my cancer journey. And I hope it's a story that you find interesting. And if you find that you take anything from it, that's great. My intent here is just to let you know my personal experience. So let's set the scene. 11 years ago, I was going through a divorce. My dad was dying of cancer. My grandfather was dying of cancer. My son had just been diagnosed with Tourette's, and my cat had died. So, as you can imagine, I had little time to attend to the lump that was at the base of my neck or to the tonsil that was seemed to be swelling and trying to grow across my throat and kiss the other tonsil. It wasn't till about 8 months later when the lump in my neck was about the size of a golf ball, and the tonsil that was trying to kiss the other had made it about a third of the way across my throat, that I thought, I better get these things checked out. And what I found out was that I had cancer. Not only that, I had HPV related squamous cell carcinoma, a form of head and neck cancer, and that it was stage 3 plus. The cancer had almost burst the capsule, like in my lymph node. I think that's a medical term they gave me, but I'm not great with medical terms. In in any event, I had waited really long and almost too long. But I was told some really good news by the doctors. They said, you've got a very, very curable form of cancer, and you're going to get through this. But with the good news, they gave me some bad news as well. I said, yeah, this cancer is very curable, but it's also, the treatments are also very painful. And they were right. Um, I had 2 rounds of excuse me, 2 rounds of chemotherapy and 35 rounds of radiation. The first 5, 6, 7 rounds of radiation, I didn't feel much pain, and I was wondering what the doctors were talking about. But after that, I started to feel the pain, and each round of radiation and each additional round felt like adding a bad sunburn on top of another bad sunburn on top of another bad sunburn. And there came a point where I couldn't eat. I went probably 2.5, almost 3 months without a solid bite of food. And I lost 40 pounds. The good news is I needed to lose 40 pounds. The bad news is while the diet worked, it's not one I'd recommend for anyone. Uh, but I got good news at the end of it. After the 2 rounds of chemo and all of the radiation, there was no detectable cancer. And so I was able to go back to my life of being a general counsel at ChargePoint. Went back to being very active. I took my son to Alaska several times. I attempted to summit Mount Shasta, although we were chased off the mountain in June by a freak blizzard. And I went back to living my life and looking for great relationships and joy in as many moments as I could find. Fast forward to 8 years. And I went to see my doctor for my annual visit, the annual checkup to see how my tongue and mouth and everything else was doing. I got great news. The news from the doctors was, you're clean. We don't see anything here. And so we'll see you in November. And to give you an idea, my appointment was in January. So I walked out of that appointment happy as always, figuring I was never going to face cancer again. I went to the dentist 10 days later, and they asked me, would you like us to check your tongue for cancer? And I was like, no need. I've been checked for cancer. Everything is great. And they said, well, your doctor's there. They would know if they saw anything. Um, Unbeknownst to the doctor, unbeknownst to the dentist, unbeknownst to me, there was a cancer in my tongue. It was just hiding. 4 days after that dental appointment, I developed a sore on the side of my tongue, and it wouldn't go away. And I went to the doctors, and at first they said, "Oh, it's just a herpes," which, frankly, that's an interesting phrase to tell someone, just a herpes, but at least it wasn't cancer. Well, unfortunately, the sore didn't go away, and I had to go to a specialist. And she looked at my tongue and she said, "You may have cancer. We're going to need to do a biopsy." And so they did a biopsy. And after the biopsy, about 3 days later, I went to England for business. I was there for our European sales conference. And at this point in time, I was in a great deal of pain. What had been about an, a 16th of an inch sore after the biopsy was probably 3/8 of an inch and open and not healing, and very hard to eat. Um, and so I was surviving on ice cream. But in any event, I went to our sales conference. And on a Thursday night at about midnight, I got a call from my doctor, and she said, "Well, I don't have good news for you. We've done the tests, and you have cancer. You have in your tongue. It's a squamous cell carcinoma." Um, so I was, as you can imagine, devastated, thinking about going through treatments again. Luckily, my friend Colleen, who is ChargePoint's chief marketing officer, was there, and she and I went for a walk. And I broke down and let her know I didn't know if I could do it. It was so hard the last time, and she said, "You can do it, John. I believe in you." Um, so I went back and I talked to the doctors and talked about my treatment options. And what they told me is surgery is the only option. We're going to have to remove part of your tongue. Now, here's the thing, I'm an attorney. I need to be able to talk for my living, not because I'm in a courtroom. I never am. I do a lot of negotiations. Plus, as you can imagine, with me being up here, I just like to talk anyway. And it scared me. I didn't know if I was going to be the same again. I didn't know what eating was going to be like. I didn't know what would be like going out and looking for a relationship, having part of my tongue removed. And so I begged for radiation again. If you can imagine, I had pain so bad I couldn't eat for almost 3 months, and I begged for radiation. But unfortunately, the type of squamous cell carcinoma I had at this point in time was one that wasn't amenable to radiation. And because of all the radiation I'd had previously, it was not advisable in any event to give me any more. So I went home with that news, and I had an appointment a few days later with Heather Starmer, and she gave me some great news. She looked at where the tumor was and she said, "You know what? I'm pretty sure we're going to get you back to where you can eat anything you want, and your speaking will be at least 95% of where we've been, but it's going to take a lot of work." After that, I went back to the office and I went and talked to my CEO. And I said, "Look, I've got cancer again, and I'm going to need surgery in a few weeks, and I'll be out for a bit. But you know me, Pat, and I'm a goal-oriented person, and this is the goal I'd like to set, and I'd like you to help me." He said, "Sure, John, what is it?" I said, "Well, it's April. Next February, when we have our annual sales conference, I want to do the talk." And he said, "You've got it. I will let you do a talk." And so I was still scared about how I would be post surgery, but I decided it's okay. I've got this. But even then, even after thinking I have this, the fear was there. And I wanted everything to be done right away. I wanted to know how the surgery was going to go right away. I wanted to know what I'd be like as soon as the surgery was over and I had had my rehabilitation. But as you know, no big project can be done in one day. So, what I decided to do is what I do anytime I have a big project. I decided I would break that huge, huge project into a series of very small projects that I knew I could go ahead and accomplish. And so my mantra was just do what you have to do today. You can get done what you need to do today. And that's what I did each day. Um, I choked down food as I was getting ready for my surgery. As I said, I was in a lot of pain. And every day I could do it. It included the one day I had to get into my sister's car as she drove me to the hospital and in order to go through the surgery and have a part of my tongue removed. But I knew I could get through that day. And the next day I knew I could get through that day. And that's what I did. I just took it one day at a time. And and that's how I approached my not only my treatment, but it's how I approached the rehab. Now the rehab was interesting. I went and I saw Heather, and we started out trying to talk. And couple weeks after my surgery, I'm pretty sure Heather tried to kill me. You see, what she did is she fed me applesauce, and I was so mad at her, not because the applesauce was dyed blue, although that would have been reason enough. But who eats applesauce? It's so big, it's so chunky, a person could easily choke to death on it, or at least that's what I thought. And frankly, I couldn't. I couldn't swallow it at all. I nearly choked, and we cleaned it out, and we decided we'd try the applesauce again at a different time. I then went home and I practiced with yogurt. And frankly, my goal was to take 10 little, I would call them sips of yogurt because it's kind of liquidy, and keep moving on. Once I'd been able to get a full yogurt down and I was on my own, I decided, you know what, I'm going to cook some eggs. This day is about cooking an egg and see if I can eat it. And I got about half down. I ate half an egg. And if you don't think it's possible to be proud of yourself for eating half an egg, let me tell you it is. What was even nicer is the next day I ate an entire egg. And even nicer than that, a week later, I actually ate some Chinese food. And to give you an idea of the success that I've had with my eating, today for breakfast, I had an egg and cheese sandwich on a bagel. So Heather was right. I can eat just about anything I want. And I want to say to you, Heather, thank you. And thank you for believing in me. So let's move forward now. We'll get to the week of the talk. The sales conference is there. And I discovered that we're actually going to have a real life astronaut who's going to be giving the inspirational talk. And I was honored that I was chosen to be one of the group of people to have dinner with this astronaut. And he was one of the nicest people I have ever met in my life. And he told the most amazing stories. And the next day, when he talked to our entire sales and marketing team, this astronaut talked about going into space and how wonderful it is. And he made you feel like you were there. It was amazing. The other thing he did, though, is he talked about when he was younger and he had a severe illness. And he talked about overcoming that illness and how he was able to triumph over that illness to become an astronaut. Well, as you can imagine, since my talk was the next day and it was going to be about overcoming an illness, um, I was a little nervous. I thought maybe I won't give my talk. This amazing astronaut has just spoken. He's talked about getting over illness. What am I going to have to say that he hadn't? I spoke to our chief revenue officer and told him I didn't want to speak, that, what I would want to say had been said. But he said to me, John, you have your own story and you have your own way of telling that story. I think you should do it. And he gave me the courage that I needed to go out and speak 10 months after having part of my tongue removed to 300 people. And so the next morning I woke up and I went to give my story. I told it. I told it well, although I've got to tell you, I almost cried several times and I had to take a break. But I got through it and people thanked me. Now, here's the thing, at the end of every sales conference, they send out a survey monkey poll to rate the speakers. And I got to tell you, that astronaut was amazing. And he actually received the second highest rating of all of the speakers. Uh, I won't tell you where I landed. I will just tell you that that astronaut was the second highest and that my talk was one of the proudest moments of my life. So, why am I telling you this? Well, if you're a caregiver, and there are a lot of you here, it's my way of saying thank you to you. When you are diagnosed with cancer, you're scared. You don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. And the caregivers that I've been blessed with have all been compassionate, caring people who have led me, guided me through my two journeys, and have given me a chance to be where I am today, which is, as you can see, an almost normally functioning adult. I say almost because as normal as I can be. But I go to Alaska every year with my son. I speak to people. I do my job and I do it well. And I could have done none of this without my caregivers. So I want to say to all of you, thank you. And if you're a patient out there, this is what I want to tell you. I tell you this because of the fact that I know something for a fact. And that's that as you go through your journey, there's going to be a lot of work and there'll be a lot of pain and there may even be some tears. But I know that if you do it, you're going to get through this. And when you're on the other side, you're going to be capable of doing great things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. As always, you really bring a wonderful perspective. We have a couple of moments before our next speaker. If anybody has any questions, there's a question that just came through for you, John. Was your second tongue cancer also HPV related?
No, it wasn't. And that's a great question because Heather will tell you I was on a panel about 8 weeks ago and during the and it was a panel on intimacy post head and neck cancer. And I was going to talk about the obligation post head and neck cancer to to let potential partners know at some point that you were let me speak again, HPV positive. Um, and the doctor who was there, who was doing the panels with us, said, I guess nobody ever told you the treatments that you go through. At the end of the day, there's no detectable amount of HPV in you. In other words, after the treatment, you are done with the HPV. Certainly, you could catch it again, I'm sure, but you're out of the HPV woods, at least with respect to that cancer. So no, it was a completely different squamous cell carcinoma.
Excellent. There are certainly a lot of thank yous, John, which you'll be able to see in the chat as well as the question and answer. Any other questions for John? All righty. Well, again, John, thank you so much for being part of the day. There is one question. Did you also have chemotherapy?
I did. For the first treatment, actually, for the second one, it was purely surgical, but I'm now going to get into a little bit of a public service announcement. Um, in both the first time I had cancer and the second time, there were clinical studies going on, and I volunteered to be in those studies each time. I am a big believer that if you have to walk down a bramble strewn thorny path, it's your duty to leave it a little bit cleaner and a little bit easier to travel for those who follow. And so the first chemo I had was with the HPV related cancer, and I had 2 rounds of cisplatin. In the second cancer I had, again, chemo was not specified. However, they're doing a study to see if a particular type of chemo administered before the surgery can help identify tumors on the lymph nodes. And so I volunteered for that. I was actually the very first Stanford patient to be a part of that study. And so, if you're a patient and you're asked, I can tell you that it really doesn't take much effort to be part of these studies, and you may just be a part of making this journey easier for the people who come after us.
Thanks, John. There are a couple of questions that have come up about dental challenges, as well as issues with dry mouth. Can you talk on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, yeah. So on the dry mouth, I'm going to tell you, I'm lucky. My cancer was on one side of my face, my right side, with the chemo and the radiation, because the radiation does wind up killing your saliva glands generally. And so I do have dry mouth from time to time, but I'm lucky that I have half my saliva glands, and they have tried to make up for the lack of the saliva from the right side. But yeah, I still have dry mouth, and it makes it a little bit harder to eat, especially when you layer on top of that missing part of your tongue. But it's relatively easy for me to mitigate because I can just drink water while I'm eating, and that helps me to swallow, and I'm in good shape. Um, what I don't have experience with, and so I can't tell you, is if you're going to have, I think they call it bilateral radiation, and you're going to lose your saliva glands on both sides, what that is like. But I do know there are some products on the market that people take to help them with the dry mouth.
Great. And one more question for you, um, about fatigue. How long does it take for the fatigue to go away? And does it go away entirely?
So for me, the fatigue has gone away entirely. And I can tell you that I went back to work each time about 6 weeks after my treatments. I was more tired after the chemo and the radiation than the surgery. Um, but for me, the fatigue has fully gone away. I'm an incredibly active person. This afternoon, I'm going to go out on a hike with friends, and we'll do somewhere between 9 and 12 miles. I've got a trip to Alaska planned with my son this summer. We're going to the backcountry of Lake Clark National Park. Um, we have a couple days of 12-mile hikes. We have a 5-mile kayak, and then a couple more days of 7 to 12-mile hikes. And so the fatigue goes away. And if you're an active person, you're going to be able to resume your activities and get back to your normal level of fitness, or at least I was able to.